Neighbor's dogs kill co-worker's cat, co-worker ruins their Christmas. Quick note, I was part of this story but not the dealer nor receiver of the revenge. Years ago, I used to work with a receptionist in a vet clinic named Margot. Margot was and still is a very sweet 65-year-old woman who had been at this practice since it was opened, some 40 years ago. She always had a smile, a joke, compliments and baked goods for your birthday. She never had an unkind word to say about anyone. She was seriously one of the coolest people I had ever worked with, and she basically knew everyone, from our regular clients to our mailman's granddaughter. The only bad thing about Margot, and this was not her fault, was that she and her family lived next to one of the trashiest, nastiest families I had ever met that had two even nastier pit bulls. I'm talking nastier than shit that had been hoarded by dung beetles for years nasty. And these dogs were constantly escaping and terrorizing the neighborhood, even trying to get into her house. Margot had asked them more than once to please keep the dogs contained, especially since she had an elderly, fat cat named Smokestack and these pits had attacked smaller animals before. The family basically told her to rot in hell, that they knew what they were doing, how dare she accuse the breed, yada yada, basically blowing her off. Margot knew there had been reports filed against her neighbors but nothing had ever been done about it really. So she made sure to keep Smokestack in the house to keep him safe and was very careful not to let him out. If you had been paying attention up until this point, you'll notice I'm using the word was and had regarding old Smokestack. And it was as awful as you think. 3 weeks before Christmas, Margot had the day off and was in the garage with Smokestack fiddling with some Christmas decorations. Unbeknownst to her, the pit next door got out and broke through the bottom of her garage door. They went right for Smokestack before she could blink and started to tear the cat apart. Margot screamed for help, and it was only when her son and husband came out with a baseball bat that they were able to free Smokestack from the jaws of these dogs. I was working this day and will never forget when she came in, crying harder than I had ever seen anyone cry in my life, clutching poor dying Smokestack in her arms. Her husband had to hold her while we tried to bring Smokestack back, but we couldn't do it. It would have taken a miracle of God and then some. And he passed away. A truly crap way to go in what should have been the golden years of his fat cat life. Margot sat there for a while with his mangled body, quietly crying for a while before she finally kissed whatever part of him was still intact and stood up. She told us all, "I've got a job to do, take care of him, girls." And then left. We figured Margot would take a few days off to be with family and then continue on with life as normal. We figured wrong. Now when I say Margot knew everyone, I mean, everyone. Right after she left the hospital, Margot gathered herself up and went to the police with pictures of poor Smokestack and told her story. The same police officers she had watched grow up over the last 20 years from rowdy middle schoolers she used to help babysit to the officers they were today. They were absolutely shocked to hear what had happened to their surrogate grandma and pushed her case to the front of the line. The case found itself before a judge whose daughter had gone to school with Margot's daughter. The judge granted an emergency, dangerous animal extraction warrant to her neighbors. Of course, there was a hearing. Within 2 weeks, which I got to admit, was ridiculously fast. The neighbors tried to argue that their dogs weren't aggressive. They even went so far as to accuse Margot of having it out for their family and making it all up. But their argument trickled when the dozens of dangerous animal reports were presented and finally completely dried out when Margot presented the surveillance video her grandson had gotten showing the dogs coming into her property and attacking poor Smokestack. The emergency extraction and humane destruction of her neighbor's dogs was granted. It was Christmas Eve when Margot heard a knock on her door. She opened it up to see the neighbors standing there, sobbing uncontrollably. They were begging her to stop animal control, that they had these dogs since they were puppies, how the kids would be devastated and it would ruin Christmas, and if she could find it in her heart to give the dogs another chance. Up until this moment, the neighbors had behaved abominably. They didn't offer to fix the garage. They never apologized for trying to slander her name in court. Hell, they didn't even pay for Smokestack to be cremated. At no point had they even shown the slightest shred of remorse for what damage their dogs had done. And as the neighbors stood there, blubbering and whimpering about how this was going to ruin their Christmas. Margot looked them straight in the eye and told them, in her calmest voice, "You took away my family, so now I'm taking yours," and shut the door in their face just as animal control pulled up onto the driveway. Margot was not surprised as she watched the dogs get hauled into the truck and taken away. After all, it was her idea for animal control to take the dogs on Christmas Eve, a perk from having known the AC officer supervisor for years. Margot even made sure the dogs were euthanized before the outside Christmas lights turned on that night. The family never received the remains, nor did they ever get a chance to bring another animal into their family, as the father proceeded to drunk drive into a telephone pole that same night, killing him instantly. Mom went off the deep end, so CPS picked up the kids by February, and ultimately, the house foreclosed in September. Despite how traumatic Smokestack's death was, I'd like to think that if the neighbors had shown at least some regret, Margot might not have gone as far as she did. She was / is still the person to forgive and forget. Or maybe, she ultimately knew it had to be done, to push it to this point of no return before another family lost a member to these irresponsible neighbors. Either way, thank you Margot for making the world a little bit safer for the pets in the world. And rest in peace, Smokestack. Hopefully I'll see you on the other side with your favorite orange sock and a can of tuna. TLDR. Co-worker's cat is killed by neighbor's dogs. Co-worker destroys neighbor's family on Christmas Eve. Now to the comments. Years ago, Margot was and still is a very sweet 65-year-old woman. How many years was she 65? She has been 65 for the last 2 centuries. Vampire or Highlander? This actually seems like r/nuclear revenge material right here. OP replied. I was debating that, but nuclear revenge seems intentionally, well, nuclear, and I don't think Margot intended for the whole family to basically implode. Good people will often be very tolerant and forgiving, but once you push them too far, you're ducked. Demons run when good women/men go to war. Beware the wrath of a patient man. Or an old lady. I love animals, but these ones sounded so dangerous. Small child might not stand a chance if the dogs got to it. I hope those people never own another pet. Ultimately it's their responsibility to raise and train dogs right, and not doing so lead to such pain for all those involved. Well, one of them is certainly never owning a pet again. This was the toughest one to read, poor Smokestack. Cats are amazing, this really hit me hard, this story. Yay, true. Especially as she was keeping her cat in, doing everything she could to keep the cat safe. And witnessing this would have been so traumatic for her. Frown. The last 2 paragraphs went from 0 to 100 real fast. Reading it, I was still like, dog kills the cat, the owner takes revenge on Christmas Eve and has dogs euthanized legally, destroys the neighbor's Christmas. But no. The husband dies, the woman goes off the deep end, the kids are shipped off, and the house is foreclosed. I believed this right up until the family never received the remains, nor did they ever get a chance to bring another animal into their family, as the father proceeded to drunk drive into a telephone pole that same night, killing him instantly. Mom went off the deep end, so CPS picked up the kids by February, and ultimately, the house foreclosed in September. Come on. OP forgot the part where Margot got a lottery ticket the same night and won the jackpot. And then they all clapped.